Oh my god. OMG to the MAX. I mean, okay, we're going into day 14, but I just want to say, if you want to be outraged, there's a lot to be outraged about on day 14. But day 15, man, when we get to that, you're just gonna think that everything up to this point has been an outrage. It's not. It is merely prelude. Oh my god, but we'll get to that. Right now, I'm trying to stay calm because I want to get through day 14, save my outrage for 15. But 14, this was Monday, the 21st of September, and, oh man. Basically, this trial is taking place in a fantasy land where nobody knows or is allowed to say that people were tortured in Guantanamo and under extraordinary rendition, even though we all know it's true. We know for a fact that it's true. But there are these lines on what witnesses can and cannot say, and that alone is an outrage. As is both judge and prosecution, trying to close this case down as quickly as they can by limiting the number of witnesses and the length of time they're allowed to speak. And she's even restricting the time allowed for closing arguments. And Craig Murray says, "For the first time, I am openly critical of the defense legal team who seem to be missing the moment to stop being railroaded and say, no, this is wrong, forcing Bereitzer to make rulings against them. Instead, most of the day was lost to negotiations between prosecution and defense as to what defense evidence could be edited out or omitted." I myself have been wondering why the defense hasn't been pointing out certain things, but let's get into the testimony of Christian Grothoff, who had prepared an analysis of how and when the unredacted cables first came to be released on the internet. Mark Summers took evidence for the defense. Grothoff said Wikileaks had shared the cable cache with David Lee of The Guardian. This had been done in encrypted form. It had a very strong encryption key. Without the long, strong password, there would be no way to access it. It was standard practice for information to be shared by an online cache with strong encryption, and not in any way irresponsible. Banking or medical records might be securely communicated in this way. Once the file is encrypted, it cannot be read without the key, nor can the key be changed. New copies can, of course, be made from the unencrypted original with different keys. If anything, this is understating it. I mean, I don't know exactly how long and strong this password was, but I mentioned this before. If you use a random number generator and you generate, out of all the keys you can type on the keyboard, 40 random letters, numbers, and symbols, that is enough to fill up a 256-bit hash. So then you run it through something like SHA-256 and turn it into an encryption key. You don't even need all the password stretching stuff because there is so much entropy in that original text that if someone tries to crack that key by brute force, it will take every single computer on the planet working together longer than the age of the universe to do it. And I mean not even close, like, trillions of times the age of the universe, even trillions upon trillions of times the age. I don't even know, like undecillion or something like that, one of those big numbers. It's not gonna happen! It's not gonna happen. I've got some videos where I mention that, and I give some examples about how unlikely it is, and of course people still come back with, but there's still a chance, right? No chance. Not unless you get that key. The only way you're gonna have any hope of decrypting that is to get that key. So Grothoff said the next event was a DDoS attack on the WikiLeaks site. He explained how it works. Multiple computers are hijacked to overload the target website. And so WikiLeaks' reaction was to encourage people to put up mirrors to maintain the availability of content. He explained this was quite a normal response to a DDoS attack. Of course, today we have things like Cloudflare. But it's the same idea. You've got multiple copies of it in multiple places on multiple servers around the world, and the DDoS attack can't get them all, so a distributed attack needs a distributed defense. Summers then asked Grothoff whether David Lee released the password. Grothoff replies that yes, Luke Harding and David Lee had revealed the encryption key in their book on WikiLeaks published in February 2011. They had used it as a chapter heading, and the text explicitly set out what it was. The copies of the encrypted file on some mirrors were useless until David Lee posted that key. And the full encrypted file wasn't even on all the mirrors. It was just on some of the mirrors to make sure it didn't get around too far, but just to make sure that there were still plenty of backups for it. So, Summers. So once David Lee released the encryption key, was it within WikiLeaks' power to take down the mirrors? Grotov. No. Summers. Could they change the encryption key on those copies? Grotov. No. Summers. Was there anything they could do? Grotov. Nothing but distract and delay. So on 25 August 2011, Der Freitag had published the story explaining what had happened. It did not itself give out the password or the location of the cache, but it made plain to people that it could be done, particularly to those who had already identified either the key or a copy of the file. Then NigelPerry.com published a blog article which identified the location of a copy of the encrypted file. With the key being in David Lee's book, the material was now effectively out. This resulted within hours in the creation of torrents and then publication of the full archive, unencrypted and unredacted, on Cryptome.org. On 1 September, according to classified material from the prosecution supplied to Professor Grotov, the U.S. government had first accessed the unredacted cache. The document showed this had been via torrent from Pirate Bay. WikiLeaks had made the unredacted cables available on 2 September after they were already widely available. They had already passed the point where they could not be stopped. Neither Pirate Bay nor Cryptome had been prosecuted for the publication. Cryptome is U.S.-based. Joel Smith then rose to cross-examine. Of course, the very first thing he did was try to attack the professor's credentials. He suggested he was an expert in computer analysis, but not in putting together a chronology of events. Are you freaking kidding me? Is anyone in the courtroom falling for this? I mean, other than Judge Dalek, apparently. Smith then asked him, "Do you think the prosecution is a step in the darkness?" Grotov replied that he thought it had strong negative ramifications for press freedom worldwide. Lewis then put it to Grotov that he had strong views and thus was evidently biased and partial. Same old tactic they've been doing the whole time. Grotov said he was a computer scientist and had been asked to research and give testimony on matters of fact as to what had occurred. He had tested the facts properly, and his personal opinions were irrelevant. And he's just standing tall against Smith. Well, later Smith asks, WikiLeaks had asked for the creation of mirrors? Grotov, yes. Smith, the strength of a password is irrelevant if you cannot control the people who have it. Grotov, that is true. The human is always the weakest link in the system. It is difficult to guard against a bad faith actor like David Lee. Tag. Smith. How many people did WikiLeaks give the key in the summer of 2010? Grotov. It appears from his book only to David Lee. He then gave it to the hundreds of thousands who had access to his book. And Smith points out that 50 media organizations and NGOs were involved in the process of redaction. Grotov. Yes, but they were not each given access to the entire cache. Smith. How do you know that? Grotov. It is in David Lee's book. Yep, using your own source against you. Hey, you guys got it read in without having to be cross-examined and say, hey, this is the gospel truth. So, lie in the bed that you made yourself. How many people in total had access to the cache from those 50 organizations? Grotov. Only Mr. Lee was given access to the full set. Only Mr. Lee had the encryption key. Julian Assange had been very reluctant to give him that access. Smith. What is your evidence for that statement? Grotov. It is in David Lee's book. Smith. That is not what it says. Smith then read out 2 long separate passages from Luke Harding and David Lee's book, both of which indeed made very plain that Assange had given Lee access to the full cache only with extreme reluctance and had been cajoled into it, including by David Lee asking Assange what would happen if he were bundled off to Guantanamo Bay and nobody else but Assange had the password. Grotov. That is what I said. Yeah, so that's not what it says, and then you read out him saying exactly that. Smith, you say that after the DDoS attack, WikiLeaks requested people to mirror the site globally. They published instructions on how to do it. Grotov, yes, but mirrors created using the WikiLeaks instructions did not include the encrypted file. In fact, this was helpful. They were trying to build a haystack. The existence of so many mirrors without the unencrypted file made it harder to find. And so then he goes into the mass release of cables. And Smith said, Were some classified secret? Grotov. No, they were unclassified. I checked this. Smith. Were some marked strictly protect? Grotov. That is not a classification, as we've already covered. Smith. Are you aware that some cables were marked strictly protect? Grotov. That is not a designation of a cable. It is applied to individuals, but it does not indicate that they are in danger, merely that for political reasons they do not want to be known as giving evidence to the U.S. government. Smith. How do you know that? Grotov. It's in the bundle I was sent and the evidence of other defense witnesses. Smith. You don't know. Grotov. I do know the strictly protect names you are referring to were in safe countries. Yeah. Whatever happened to that thing about not asking a witness a question unless you already knew what the answer was going to be? I don't think any of these prosecuting numbskulls have heard that, so. Anyway, Smith went on about time zones, and depending on what you were in, the release could have been early on 1st of September rather than 31st of August, and that it was not possible to put an exact time with a window of a few hours on Cryptome's unredacted publication early in the morning on 1 September. And Murray points out, this exercise could cut both ways. The timing of a tweet saying a copy or torrent is up and giving a link must be sent out after the material is put up, which could be some time before sending the tweet. Grotov concluded that at the end of the day, we do not know to-the-minute timings for every publication, but what we can say for certain is that all the publications discussed, including Cryptome, were before Wikileaks. Smith then invited Grotov to agree that when Wikileaks themselves published the full documents later on 2 September, it was more comprehensible and visible than earlier publications. Grotov replied it was not more comprehensive, it was the same. It was more visible, but by that time the cat was well out of the bag, and the unredacted cables were spreading rapidly all over the internet. There was no way to stop them. So Mark Summers re-examines and says the evidence was that the encryption key for the full cache was given to David Lee and to nobody else. The storage method was secure. Precisely the same method was used to send around the court bundles in this case. Only David Lee had revealed a password. And Grotov confirmed that the WikiLeaks instructions created mirrors without the encrypted cache. All the copies of the encrypted cache he could find on other mirrors were on sites which plainly were created using other methods. Summers then took Grotov back over the timeline because Joel Smith was trying to muddy that. But Judge Dalek prevented him from doing so. She interrupted Summers 4 times during his re-examination. On the extraordinary basis that this ground was gone over before, extraordinary because that is the point of a re-examination. Bereitzer had permitted Smith to ask 14 successive questions of Grotov on the subject of why he had signed an open letter, which I didn't go over, but you can read in the blog post. The double standard was very obvious, which brings us to a very crucial point. The next witness, Andy Worthington, was at court and ready to give evidence, but was prevented from doing so. The U.S. government objected to his evidence about his work on the Guantanamo detainee files being heard because it contained allegations of inmates being tortured at Guantanamo. No, we can't possibly have any evidence in court of things that we know were taking place. So Judge Dalek says she doesn't need to hear evidence on these points. Summers replied that the ECHR had already ruled on these as facts, but it was necessary they be stated by witnesses as appropriate as it went to the Article 10 ECHR defense. Lewis maintained the objection from the U.S. government. Bereitzer said she wanted the prosecution and the defense to produce a witness schedule that would get the case finished by the end of next week, including closing statements. She wanted them to agree what evidence could and could not be heard. Where possible, she just wanted the gist of it. She also said she didn't want to hear closing arguments in court, but she would have them in writing, and the defense and prosecution could just summarize them briefly orally. And Murray says, what the defense should have said at this point is, Madam, the dogs in the street know that people were tortured in Guantanamo Bay. In the real world, it is not a disputed fact. If Mr. Lewis's instructions were to deny that the earth is round, would our witnesses have to accommodate that? The truth of these matters plainly goes to the Article 10 defense, and by pandering to the denial of a notorious and plain fact, this court will be held up to mockery. We will not discuss such ludicrous censorship with Mr. Lewis. If you wish to rule that there must be no mention of torture in evidence, then so be it. The defense did not say any of that, but as instructed entered a process with the prosecution lawyers of agreeing the shortening and editing of evidence, a process which took all day and with which Julian showed plain signs of being uncomfortable. Andy Worthington did not get to give his evidence. The only further evidence heard was the reading of a gist of a statement from Cassandra Fairbanks. I did not hear most of this because, having adjourned to 4:30 p.m., the court re-adjourned earlier than advertised while Julian's dad, John Shipton, the musician MIA, and I were away having a coffee. But he does link to an account by Kevin Gostola, giving the gist of her evidence. I'll link to that too, and he kind of goes over the basis of what had happened, and this is about Richard Grenell, one of Donald Trump's closest envoys in Europe. He was the ambassador to Germany. He was one who brokered a deal with the Ecuador government for Assange's arrest and expulsion from the embassy. A wealthy Republican donor named Arthur Schwartz was apparently aware of the plan months before they were carried out. He had retaliated against Fairbanks after she informed Assange of the Trump administration's plans. On the 10th day of the extradition trial against Assange, and I don't know how he's numbering the days and why his numbering is different from Murray's, but whatever, his legal team entered a statement into the record from Fairbanks that was dated June 7, 2020, and described communications with Schwartz in which she became aware of the Trump administration's pressure campaign to remove Assange from the embassy. Fairbanks was part of a direct message group that contained multiple people who either worked for Trump or were close to him in other ways. That included Grenell and Schwartz. And Fairbanks said that Schwartz even brought up her 9-year-old child, which he perceived as an intimidation tactic to try and keep this call off the record and not to be repeated. And Fairbanks said, Schwartz repeatedly insisted that I stop advocating for Wikileaks and Assange, telling me that a pardon isn't going to effing happen. She didn't say effing, by the way. And she was quoting Schwartz in that part. He knew very specific details about a future prosecution against Assange that were later made public and that only those very close to the situation then would have been aware of. He told me that it would be the Manning case that he would be charged with and that it would not involve the Vault 7 publication or anything to do with the DNC. He also told me that they would be going after Chelsea Manning, who, if you remember, already served her time. Her sentence was commuted. So Schwartz told her they were going to go in the embassy to snatch Assange. She maintained entering the embassy of a sovereign nation and kidnapping of a political refugee would be an act of war, and he responded, not if they let us. And remember, this was right after the election of the new Ecuadorian president, who apparently was anti-Assange, and so they were able to do that. And both Assange and Fairbanks had an even worse experience on March 25, 2019. Here's what she said. I described the extraordinary circumstances where I was locked in a cold meeting room for an hour while embassy staff demanded Assange be subjected to a full body scan with a metal detector before allowing him in the room. I described it at the time as eerily similar to visits I have made to inmates at federal penitentiaries in the U.S. And we've covered in the past, I think it's mostly on the podcast, but probably some other videos too, but searching the podcast might be a good way. Just all of the stuff just reporters trying to interview Assange have had to go through, or even family members who are wanting to see him, his own partner and children. So, a major issue was that Assange wanted to bring a small radio into the conference room to muffle our voices so that microphones undoubtedly surveilling the room would not pick up what we were saying as easily. Only 8 minutes of our 2-hour scheduled visit were in the end available because of the conflict with security staff at the embassy. We were told if we wanted to talk, it must be done in the conference room, and only 2 minutes were left. And Fairbanks heard Assange say, "Is this a prison? This is how you treat a prisoner, not a political refugee." He accused the enemy of targeting him with illegal surveillance, which we found out later, that's exactly what they were doing. Schwartz did not believe he could trust Fairbanks with information related to WikiLeaks any longer. He apparently knew what would happen and why she was mistreated in the embassy, but refused to talk about it. Schwartz had also sent several messages about how everyone involved with WikiLeaks deserved the death penalty. I noted in our conversation that it had been reported that Grenell only got a verbal agreement that there would be no death penalty, nothing in writing. Schwartz's response to this was to send me a shrug emoji, and he continued his tirade about how Assange deserved to die. So she tweeted out the ABC News report about this, and Grenell was furious. He tried to get her fired. He demanded that the tweet be deleted, which he eventually did. Schwartz called her too and was ranting and raving about how he could go to jail. He claimed she had tweeted classified information, which made no sense because she shared a news media report. And Fairbanks concludes, I believe this connected President Trump to those who have been reported as having secured the deal to arrest Assange. I believed Schwartz's statement to be correct because his close personal ties to both President Trump and Grinnell are well known. There's a lot more in Gostola's blog that you can read for yourself, and I'm going to go back to Murray and his comments where he says, I am very concerned about the obvious collusion of the prosecution and the judge to close this case down. The extraordinary conflation of time management and excluding evidence which the U.S. government does not want heard in public is plainly illegitimate. The continual chivying and interruption of defense counsel in examination when prosecution counsel are allowed endless repetition amounting to harassment and bullying is illegitimate. Some extraordinarily long prosecution cross-examinations, such as that of Carrie Shankman, the lawyer, have every appearance of deliberate time-wasting and distraction. And so he mentions that Tuesday's witness is Professor Michael Kopelman. The prosecution have indicated they wish to cross-examine him for an extraordinary 4 hours, which Bereitzer agreed against defense objections. Her obsession with time management is distinctively subjective. Obviously, there's a moral question for me in how much of this medical evidence I publish. The decision will be taken in strict accordance with the views of Julian, or if we cannot ascertain that, his family. So he does leave a lot of stuff out for day 15, but you can understand that. But even so, man, they'll be testifying as to Julian's mental state and what he'll be put through. And I'm just going to go ahead and warn you. If you have depression, or an anxiety disorder, or some form of autism, or anything like that, prepare to be outraged. So I'm going to see if I can calm down a bit and maybe give you a little more level-headed reading of what happened on day 15. But I'm sure I won't be able to contain my outrage either, as I hope you do not contain yours. This is going to be something to write people about, whether it's congressmen or letters to the editor or what, your mother, anyone who will listen. This is important stuff. Please tell them about this. I'm kind of disappointed in the views I'm getting, not for the sake of my channel, because overall it's pretty much going to be the same number of views I always get, and so I'm not worried about the monetization or anything like that. I just want this stuff out there. I want more people talking about this. Spread it around, even if it's a way that doesn't get me monetized. I don't care. Spread it around. More people need to see this. Please. Please. We'll be back for the completely bewilderingly primitive day 15. Oh my God, you will not believe this. But until then, please stay strong and be free.